Gender Issues of the American Civil War by Sam Enderlein. Civil War lasted from 1861 in April all the way to May in 1865. This impacted our nation by division, death, and complete upheaval of society. Gender and culture roles of the American Civil War. The South's social culture was based on race, class, and gender. Their economic life was focused mainly on plantations with things like sugarcane, cotton, etc., and slaves were a necessary investment to preserve this plantation community since they needed to produce a lot. And since, like it said, that was the economic life and that was the economic foundation, so slaves were a necessary investment. Men were dependent upon black slaves for living because usually the men never ever really did any of the work at all themselves. Southern masculinity was also threatened by the anti-slavery movement, and then men defended their right to be masters of their slave-holding households. Lives were agricultural based in the South, and also causing people in the South to be more far apart when they were living, since there was a lot of land being used for crops and fields and such. Whereas Northerners were more concentrated and more urban and had really highly populated areas. The North social culture was also based on race, class, and gender. Men and women both functioned in separate spheres of their own doing. Men left home daily to earn money and enjoy the public life, while women usually were also subservient to their husbands. Uh, Most of the time at home, when it came to whether during the war, before, with many of the men going off to war, the women had to run the homes by themselves, manage the homes by themselves in many cases, include running farms or businesses that their husbands left behind. The gender and culture roles at the wars began in the North. Men reacted with a readiness to fight when Southern states seceded from the Union. Men assumed that Southern rebellion would easily be overcome or overcame because the North had industry and wealth. Women of the North did not sympathize with Southern women because they assumed that the slaves did all of their work. The early wartime effects on gender roles in the South and North. Suddenly, men in both North and South had to leave their families, and women filled the gaps in family business and economic challenges. Northern men and women. Both men went off to war on both sides, and the women managed the home by themselves, and like I said before, often included running farms and businesses that husbands had left behind. Southern men and women. The Southerners interpreted the war as a Northern men's challenge to their households. Southern women also defended their homes and property. Southern women were prepared to be defenders of their home and assumed economic management of plantations and slaves. And Southern men believed that Northern men were determined to destroy their way of life. War changed the authoritarian status of men, and the independence of women would forever be affected. Starting with the gender crisis. In the North, men did not expect women to fight. Women were expected to be caregivers and caretakers for the wounded in the wars, or if they were back home for businesses, farms, and their families. Many women took on jobs that had traditionally been a man's job before the war, including things like factories and government positions that were vacated when men had to go fight. The demand for goods led to gender benefits for white women as labor. Gender roles flipped as women working for pay enabled their households to survive. Women also organized to aid soldiers. Women advanced in leadership through the Sanitary Commission and medical work. Over in the South, men emphasized the sacrifices of women in wartime. White women became moral guardians of Southern honor and identity. Women also declared themselves as equal participants with men in the social and political events of that time. The women did memorial work, which included things like building cemeteries and statues, and then also protecting overall the honor of the South. The men were dependent on female labor and pay while they're out fighting to make sure that economics were still being taken care of and budgets and income were still coming in while they were out and fighting, and the slaves were still working as well. Women demanded admission to universities, state funds to establish schools for girls, and women on boards of public institutions. In both South and North, women fought side by side with men, either for pay or a dedication to it and a passion for a cause. Women smuggled medicines and ammunition across enemy lines, and women also began to organize for their rights and use their power of femininity through women's associations in the world outside their home. The war brought new opportunities for women. Soldiers were needed at the battlefront, Oftentimes, women brought healing to them with things like sanitary conditions inside of a field hospital and tending to the wounded and comforting the sick. Gender results after. In the South, men were forced to surrender their arms, and many females continued the fight. Women were also determined to maintain the honor of their men and maintain that honor would be defended. Women hospital workers systematically altered Southern gender roles. Women redefined the nature of Southern femininity without antagonizing men. Many women lost their husbands during the war, and many of them left their homes due to destruction of the cities. All women were affected whether by supporting the armies or by losing a member of the family. Some conclusions is that social and political change swept the nation, resulting in new roles for women. Women learned to support themselves as teachers, nurses, and in business. Black women wanted literacy and self-reliance in earning wages and establishing schools without white control. Many Southerners resented the freed slaves, resulting in vast movements of blacks to the North. Women of both South and North established cemeteries and raised money for statues, dedicated themselves to take care of veterans, and chronicled the experiences of sacrificial women and men. These events of the war challenged a lot of the feminine culture and prepared the way for an early feminist movement. Influential women of the Civil War started with Clara Barton, who was a hospital nurse, a teacher, and also a patent clerk. Nursing education at that time was not formalized or really offered a lot, and so she did not have a way to attend a nursing school. And so she actually not only started the Red Cross and was a really profound nurse, but a lot of the things that she performed was all self-taught. Frances Clayton, who went under the name of Jack Williams while she was fighting, actually disguised herself as a man to fight for the Union Army. And she fought in the Missouri Regiment and actually fought next to her husband as well. She fought in 18 battles under disguise and even was wounded 3 times and taken prisoner at one point. Dr. Mary Walk, she was a volunteer doctor in a military hospital. She also was an abolitionist and a prohibitionist, a prisoner of war, and a surgeon. She was mostly known for wearing trousers and a man's coat, and that she worked for the Union as a nurse and a spy while she waited for an official commission as a surgeon. She actually is the only woman to ever receive the Medal of Honor. This is Belle Boyd. Belle Boyd was a Confederate spy who did most of what she did in her father's hotel in Virginia. That's where she usually operated and provided valuable information to Confederate General Stonewall Jackson. Sarah Emma Edmonds, she was disguised as Frank Thompson, and she served in the Union Army. And like I had mentioned earlier, her alias or her name that she went under while she was trying to be a man was Frank Thompson. She also sometimes would disguise herself as a black man or even a Confederate woman to try to spy on Confederate troops. After her identity was exposed, she actually had to serve as a nurse with the Union instead. Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was an abolitionist and a political activist. She had a lot of anti-slavery activist kind of events. She was also mainly known by many people and to this day known for doing the Underground Railroad and creating safe houses. She was born into slavery actually, and she escaped and made missions to rescue slaves using, like I said, the Underground Railroad and anti-slavery activist type things. She also served with the Union Army in the South, in South Carolina. She organized a spy network and even leading raids and spy expeditions, including the Combahee River expedition. This is Mary Bickerdike. Mary Bickerdike was a hospital administrator. She was on the Union side, and mainly after she had stopped serving or stopped being associated with the Civil War, she always continued to advocate for veterans. Sarah Rosetta Wakeman. Sarah Rosetta Wakeman was also on the Union side. She actually went under the name of Lyons Wakeman as fighting with the New York Volunteer Infantry. And she is often referred to as Mary Bowser. Pauline Cushman. Pauline Cushman was a spy for the Union Army. Fortunately, later she was caught and using incriminating papers. She actually was supposed to be hung, but 3 days before the hanging, the arrival of the Union Army stopped everything for her, and she was able to, be freed and not have to get hung. With the activity she revealed, she was forced to stop spying. Mary Boykin Chestnut authored a book published as her Civil War diary, and it detailed the changes in society, not just in her own high-class plantation society, but even in all classes that were in her book. Jenny Hodges. Jenny Hodges served in the Union Army. She pretended to be a man under the name of Albert Cashier. As a Union soldier, she fought in a lot of battles, including battles like Vicksburg, Nashville, and Mobile. After the war, she continued to live as a man and maintained her identity, and she even took up farming. But while she attended several post-war conventions and later resided in a home for Union veterans, her secret was put to the test when she suffered a broken hip in an automobile accident. And but thankfully, due to the loyalty among her fellow veterans, her secret was again buried until after her death. And eventually, Jenny was buried, and she actually was buried in her Union uniform upon her death in 1915.